Hello and welcome everyone to this workshop about coding of medication errors and other product use errors and issues. I'm Caroline Wilson and work as a medical officer at the MSSO. I will be your instructor today, and I'm supported by my colleague Jane Knight, who was speaking to you before. So together we will take you through this workshop, which will last for about 90 minutes. We would like to make this webinar interactive. Jane mentioned this already. So please submit your questions or send us your comments through the question panel that you find in the control panel of the GoToWebinar application on the right hand of your screen. And I will allow as much time as possible for questions both during the course and also at the end of the presentation. But just one remark. Please do not raise specific coding questions addressing very specific verbatim terms. We will not address those, but we will guide you in terms of coding principles. Because we are quite a large group today, it may be that we cannot address all your questions during the webinar due to time constraints. But don't worry, we will then address them individually via email with you. You may have seen that we are offering 2 of these workshops this week. The first one was yesterday. We are doing this to allow more participants to take part in the workshop, as the number of attendees is limited to 150 participants. Please note that each workshop pair will always have the same content, also in the future. But the topics and exercises of the workshops will change over time. After each General Principles for Medication Error Coding webinar, so the Part 1 webinar, there will be a workshop pair with new examples, new exercises. And if you have verbatims that relate to our topics today that may be interesting for a larger audience, please let us know. We may consider them for the workshops. Now let me start with a presentation. You all know that ICH adopted the development of Medra in the mid-90s and became the owner of the terminology. ICH then, on contract, appointed the MSSO to take care of the maintenance and further development of the terminology based on user feedback, also to provide and organize corresponding training, and to administer the Medra licensees. And all these MSSO activities are overseen by the ICH Medra Management Committee. ICH is not only the owner of Medra, the terminology itself, but also owns this training material. It is protected worldwide. You may use the slides with the exception of the Medra and ICH logos, but will have to clearly indicate that ICH owns the copyright. Also, any adaptations of the slides have to be clearly labeled. And the second bullet point refers to warranty and liability issues you should be aware of. And the third one here at the end is not relevant for today because we will not be using any third-party slides. The workshop nicely complements the webinar provided 2 weeks ago about the general principles that have to be considered when coding medication errors and other product use errors and issues. I hope that you have attended this webinar because our workshop today builds on this webinar. Now let me provide you with an overview on what we will cover today. I will first briefly go through the most important general principles for coding of medication errors that we discussed in detail in the previous webinar. We will then apply these principles in exercises using the verbatims and narratives that you have received beforehand on Monday. And we will conclude with a question and answer session as mentioned before. But we will address your questions and comments throughout the workshop as well. So please use the question panel to ask questions and for your comments, because we want to make this session as interactive as possible. And as we always mention in the Let's Code Together webinars that Jane and I provide, it may well be that in some instances you may not agree on the proposed term selection. And in the interest of time, we may then have to agree to disagree. But I hope that this will really not be the case too often today. As already stated, we will not address specific verbatims that you may propose via the questions panel, but you have the option to propose new examples for consideration via the survey at the end of the session or via an email to the MSSO help desk. This slide explains about the polling that Jane mentioned already. If you would like to join the quizzes and participate in the examples today, please enter the indicated web address into the URL bar at the top of your internet browser in your computer, tablet, or cell phone. Here it is, paulf.com. It will then take you to a log on screen, and you'll be asked for a username. The poll is completely anonymous, so you don't need to enter your name, but please enter my name as the username, that is Carol N. Wills 584, with no spaces, and then click join. Or you may also scan the QR code with your smartphone, and it will bring you directly to the poll. And as soon as I activate the first question, you'll be able to see it and also to respond. I just leave it on the screen for a moment to allow you to enter the required information or to scan the QR code here. But you don't have to get under time pressure because you will be able to see these credentials on each slide that relates to the quizzes. And Jane has put these credentials in the chat as well. Now let's see whether it works. Where are you joining from today? Where are you located? Oh, I see the US, it's either in the middle of the night or very, very early for you. I see Taiwan, Australia, South Korea, India, China, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Merhaba. Somebody is in the Antarctica or in the Atlantic Ocean. Spain, Portugal, bon dia, buenos dias. Kalimera to Greece. I see Sweden, UK, lots of people in Iceland. So welcome everybody. Nice to meet you all in cyberspace. Next, a short reminder regarding the basic rules to be followed for coding with Medra that are, of course, also applicable when coding medication errors and other product use issues. The quality of the reported information and the extraction of relevant information during data entry are a basic requirement for good and meaningful coding. If the information received is vague or ambiguous, of poor quality, ask for clarification, query. Coding is done at the LLT level, and the LLT that most accurately, most specifically reflects the reported incidents and events should always be selected. Nothing should be interpreted, added, and no relevant information should be omitted. This is really the basic rule, code as reported. And of course, only current LLTs should be used for coding purposes. I assume that you are all very familiar with these basic rules, so I will not go into this any further. For coding product use errors and problems, the following tips may be helpful. First, you should be familiar with the Medra concept descriptions and the points to consider guidances so that you know where to find more detailed information, where to find more guidance for this topic. You should always have good knowledge of the Medra structure and hierarchy, and for the area of medication errors and other product use issues, you should be very knowledgeable about the hierarchy in SOC injury, poisoning, and procedural complications. Once you have found a potentially appropriate LLT and PT for the reported incident, check the placement of the selected LLT PT and whether this really accurately reflects the reported event. Always check the hierarchy. It is best to search the Medra hierarchy top-down when coding medication errors and other product use concepts, unless you are already very experienced in coding such incidents, such occurrences. And finally, if you can't find a specific term for medicines or vaccines or medical devices, look out for a product term that would be suitable for your coding task, because you can replace terms like medicine, drug, vaccine, or device by product. If you find a suitable product term, use it. The following chart can be used to classify medication errors and other product use issues. It visualizes the decision-making process. Here are the 3 core questions that you will have to ask yourself. Did the incident occur intentionally or unintentionally? Who has caused it? Who triggered it? And was it in the context of therapeutic use or for a therapeutic purpose? Yes or no? Let us now assume that the unapproved product use took place intentionally. If this is decided by a healthcare professional and for therapeutic purposes, we classify these events as off-label use. If this originates from the patient or consumer and also happens in the therapeutic setting, we classify this as intentional product misuse. But if the deviation does not occur in the context of therapeutic use of the product, the deviation is classified as drug abuse or drug addiction, drug dependence. If the unapproved product use is unintentional, this can also be caused by both the healthcare professional or patient consumer. This always occurs in the context of therapeutic use of the relevant product and is classified as medication or product use error. But often, case information does not allow for any of these classifications because some information may be missing. So what can be done when getting similar reports for coding purposes? For these scenarios, the flowchart must be expanded with 2 neutral terms. See the question marks here? So if it cannot be clarified whether an intentional deviation from the label by the patient happens for therapeutic reasons or not, an appropriate LLT under PT intentional product use issue should be assigned. Here it is. And if it cannot be clarified whether such an unapproved use occurred by mistake or intentionally, an appropriate LLT under product use issue should be assigned. So, or some other vague term, neutral term that would capture the specifics of the deviation. So this is the flowchart that we will be using also throughout the webinar in order to classify the reported events on a more general level before thinking about term selection, before searching for LLTs. So please remember the definition of the term medication error as well when working on our exercises. A medication error is any preventable event that may result in the improper use of medication or harm to the patient while the medication is under the control of those involved in the medication process, meaning physicians, pharmacists, nurses, patients, consumers, or their families. The second aspect that is highlighted in green is important to remember. These errors occur during product use in the medication process, in the medicinal product process, use process, when the product is under the control of the healthcare provider, patient, or consumer. The term does not refer to errors that occur during manufacturing or are caused by wholesalers or other external parties or factors which are outside of the control of the healthcare provider, patient, or consumer. Medication and other product use errors may be related to professional practice, the products themselves, and healthcare processes and systems, including prescribing, communication of orders, product labeling, product packaging and nomenclature, preparation of products, and their dispensing, distribution, and administration, as well as related education and product monitoring. Here one last hint before starting with our exercises. Before searching for suitable terms for such coding scenarios, you should always first assess the reported information, the verbatim. First, check for the 3 criteria, the basic criteria that I've shown earlier for the classification. Did the incident occur intentionally or unintentionally? Who has caused it? Who has triggered it? And was it for a therapeutic purpose in the context of therapeutic use? Then check at which stage the error occurred, whether this information is available, and whether it led to subsequent errors and even harm in the patient. If contributing factors are reported, they need to be captured in addition. Or it may be that the report was only referring to circumstances that only could lead to a medication error, but no error occurred yet. We can also capture such scenarios. Or was an error made but subsequently intercepted before reaching the patient? Because the type of report, the type of information that you get will influence the way you search for appropriate terms. It will help you find the most suitable LLTs, the closest matches, and it will make your search more efficient and more targeted. With this, let's apply these principles now and work on our exercises. Please use a Medra browser and try to find the best LLT or LLTs to code the verbatims, which we have sent to you before this workshop, and do your searches either top-down or bottom-up to find the most specific LLT or LLTs. We will use Poll Everywhere for the submission of your proposals, and we will review and discuss the correct assignments for each verbatim. Here the information how to access the browser. You will be able to access it on the Medra website. Here on the top, on the right-hand corner, you find WBB. This is a shortcut to access the web-based browser that the MSSO provides. And here is the temporary password that you can use. It's temporary, so it will expire in a few days from now. But you can, of course, also use your company-specific credentials or your company-specific browser as well. And again, Jane has put this information in the chat. Here's the first verbatim. A nurse was instructed by a doctor to administer 140 milligrams of calcium chloride to her 8-month-old patient. Thinking that there were 10 milligrams in a milliliter instead of 100, she calculated in her head that she'd need to give the patient 14 milliliters of calcium, a dose that was 10 times higher than prescribed. And the baby died 5 days later. So this is a real-life case. We will first have to look at the verbatim to better understand what has been reported and to decide which elements have to be captured via coding. The first 3 questions that have to be answered to classify the medication use issue, here they are. Do we know whether the incident was accidental or intentional? Who has caused it? And was it in the context of therapeutic use? Do we know at which stage the medication, in the medication practice, the error occurred? Do we have to split code because there's a chain of events? Was there a root cause provided why this error or issue occurred? And also we have to ask ourselves, was this error or issue intercepted? Or was the report only referring to a potential occurrence of a medication error? And I think it's quite obvious here. So these are the questions that we can answer based on our verbatim, and these need to be considered when looking for suitable LLTs. So which LLTs would you select here? How would you how would you approach this verbatim? Jane has put it in the chat so that you can see it, because it did not fit on this Poll Everywhere slide. It was too long. The nurse was instructed by a doctor to administer 140 milligrams of calcium chloride to the baby, and she thought that 1 milliliter contained 10 milligrams, so she then calculated that she would need to administer 14 milliliters, and this dose was 10 times higher than prescribed, and the baby died. Is it a product label confusion, wrong concentration prepared, dose calculation error, extra dose administered? What is it? Do you have to capture drug toxicity, the death of the baby? Let's look what you're voting for. Wrong concentration prepared, dose calculation error, and drug dose accidental seem to be the favorites here. Several of you would also quote the death of the baby, and there is some discrepancy here. Most of you would go for drug overdose accidentals, other only for drug overdose. So let me close the poll. Thank you for joining. Here we are. Yeah.
Excuse me. Could you do the QR code again, please? Because a few people, I think, didn't get how to join.
Okay, here it is. So just scan it. If you lose connection, just let me know.
Thank you.
So here is the final result of your votes. And now let us look into our decision chart, how to classify this incident first. Is it intentional or accidental? I think it's quite clear that this occurrence was accidental. It was, the deviation was done by a nurse, and it was the context of therapeutic use of the product. So it is a medication error. Now let me switch my screens and also access the browser here, as you did. Here it is. Here's my Medra ID and my password, and here we are. So let me first explain and show you the hierarchy in stock injury, poisoning, and procedural complication, where you find the relevant terms. In this system organ class, you find an HLGT that is called medication errors and other product use errors and issues. Here it is. If I open it, you see the high-level terms, and you see that most of them are grouped based on the stage where the error or issue occurred. So administration, dispensing, monitoring, preparation, prescribing, selection, storage, transcribing, communication issues. We also have an NEC grouping, not elsewhere classified, that groups PTs which do not fit into any of the other categories here. And then we have separate HLGTs, one for the off-label uses and intentional product misuses and use issues. If I open it, you see that off-label uses has a separate HLT, also the intentional product use issues and the intentional product misuses. Misuse meaning intentional deviation for therapeutic purposes in the context of therapeutic use of the product. And intentional product use issues, they refer to intentional deviations where it's unknown whether it was for therapeutic purposes, both by patients or consumers. Off-label uses meaning intentional deviation by a healthcare professional in the context of therapeutic use. We have a separate one for overdoses and underdoses, NEC, not elsewhere classified. And here you will find the intentional overdose, prescribed overdose, radiation overdose, and the same holds true for the underdoses. The accidental overdoses, of course, you will find under HLT, product administration errors and issues. Here there are accidental overdose, accidental underdose. So this is the hierarchy, and now let us check the terms that were proposed for our verbatim. So if I go for wrong concentration, prepared, and search, here it is, right mouse click, go to browser. I will then see it in the hierarchy. It's considered a preparation error and issue, but this the nurse did not prepare the calcium chloride. She took a vial and just administered the wrong volume, and this way also the wrong dose. So she didn't prepare anything. So this would be not appropriate. Then we have a dose calculation. Let us check for the dose calculation, whether we find something here in search. Here's the dose calculation error. We saw it is an error what we are looking at. So dose calculation error would be the correct term. It's grouped under medication errors, product use errors and issues, NEC. So it was a dose calculation error, not by a device. The nurse made it. So this would be a perfect match to what has been reported, that the nurse made an error when calculating the dose due to wrong assumptions. Now, the other option that was provided in the poll was product label confusion. Let me look for product and confusion and search. Again, go to browser. Now we are in an HLT that is named product confusion, errors and issues. And you see that we have a product confusion, only one LLT there, but also product design confusion, product dosage form confusion, product label confusion, drug label look-alike, patient instructions for use in label confusing. This was not the case in our verbatim. So the nurse just miscalculated the dose. It was not due to the fact that the instructions of the physician were misleading. So it was not a communication issue. It was not a product issue, a product confusion issue. It was just an error she made on her side. So product label confusion would not be an appropriate term here, appropriate code assignment. So then we have the question, did the error have consequences? Is a chain of events reported? Yes, it is, because the calculation, miscalculation of the dose led to a dose administration that was higher than prescribed. So there was a chain, and we have to split code. And we have the extra dose administered. That was one of the options. But is the extra dose administered appropriate? Extra dose administered means that two separate doses were administered. A dose is one dose given at one time. Here we had one dose that was given to the baby, but it was too high. So it was not an extra dose, it was one dose. Then we have, okay, it was one dose. We have medication dose increase. Let's see whether we find some. Here the medication dose increased. And we see here that this LLT resides under therapy change. And this is why you really have to check the hierarchy of terms. At first sight, it looks suitable. Medication dose increased. It does not contain the information that it was an error first, but it's grouped under therapy change. So it's considered a therapeutic measure. So this would not be appropriate. And then we are told that the dose that was finally provided to the baby was 10-fold higher than previously prescribed. And knowing that the maximum pediatric dose is 1,000 milligram, our baby received 1,400 milligrams. So it was really way beyond the maximum dose that is mentioned in the label of this product. So it was definitely an overdose. And because it resulted from an error, you would then code it specifically as possible. And if I look for terms that relate to overdose, you will see that there's a perfect option here, a neutral term, overdose. But let's look at other options here, accidental overdose. This would be the perfect match. Go to browser. Let's see whether we find LLTs that even better reflect what has been reported. So it was a drug overdose accidental would be the most specific LLT we can select for the reported incident. Let me show you some other reference that you can use if you're not sure about the meaning of certain terms. Then refer to the Medra concept descriptions. So these are not medical definitions, but are descriptions on how certain terms are interpreted and classified in Medra. Abuse, you see abuse, addiction, and other terms. So all these descriptions are, of course, reconciled with regulators, so you can use them. It's not just the MSO coming up with these descriptions. And let me show you the concept description now for dose, just to show you how to find it. Here it is, dose, a quantity to administer at one time, such as a specified amount of medication. I told you this. And dose omission, the failure to administer an ordered dose to a patient before the next scheduled dose, if any. Okay, what about dosage? Dosage is the determination and regulation of the size, frequency, and number of doses. So this is a more general term that not only refers to a single dose, but also to the schedule and also the duration of therapy. It's a overarching term, whereas dose is much more specific, only referring to one dose given. And what about the product confusion terms? Let us check for the product confusion terms. They are also explained in the concept description here. Product label confusion, product name confusion, all of this product packaging confusion, they are addressed in the description. So it's really useful if you're not sure about the meaning of a specific terms, look into the descriptions. You won't find all of them, but quite a number of them in this listing. Okay, now let me switch back to my slides. And here are the proposed codes. We would code to dose calculation error. It's the same PT, and to drug overdose accidental under accidental overdose. Are there any related questions or comments, Jane?
The only comment is, why didn't you choose incorrect dose administered? That would be less specific, wouldn't it?
It would be less specific. First of all, it would not contain the information that it was accidental. Incorrect dose administered could be a dose that is too low or too high, but here we know it was a 10-fold dose then prescribed, and it was definitely beyond the maximum recommended dose in the label. So it was an overdose, and the baby died at the end. So that's why we would select the drug overdose accidental. It captures the accidental nature of the event and also the overdose, and that it was a drug. By the way, we don't, yeah?
No, carry on.
We know that the baby died 5 days later. And yesterday and also today, several of you have also voted to code to death.
Yes.
So it's you don't have to code the death of a patient if a reason for the death is reported. Here it was the accidental overdose. The accidental overdose led to the death of the baby. And that's why you would capture the fatal outcome of this accidental overdose in a separate database field. It's of course a serious adverse event, and you would capture the fatal outcome in a separate database field, either in a clinical study but also in drug safety. Any further questions?
No, that was the question about why. What about death? Thank you.
Drug toxicity was another option that was proposed. Toxicity was not reported. Of course, it was somehow a toxicity because the baby died, but it was not reported, and that's why the drug overdose accidental really already captures the relevant information. You would not interpret, you would not add information, so you would not add and code to drug toxicity in addition. Next one. Here it is reported that a nurse administered a dose of an antiarrhythmic medication several hours earlier than it instructed. The patient was found to have severe QTc prolongation on his ECG. We will again first closely look at the verbatim to better understand this report and what has to be captured for this coding scenario. We have to check for the first basic questions, first which always have to be answered. And are we told at which stage the error occurred and whether there was a chain of events, whether the first incident led to subsequent events or to harm, to clinical consequences in the patient. And like in the first example, the last two bullet points are not relevant here. So no root cause for the deviation from doctor's prescription was reported, nor was it intercepted. It reached the patient. So this is, again, what needs to be considered when looking for suitable LLTs. Now, please make your choices. Here's our verbatim. The nurse administered a dose of an antiarrhythmic medication several hours earlier than instructed, and the patient was found to have a severe QTc prolongation on his ECG afterwards. Wrong dose, wrong schedule, drug dose administration interval too short, intentional deviation from dosage regimen, drug use for unapproved schedule, drug dose omission in error, electrocardiogram QTc interval prolonged or QT interval prolonged. What would you select? Let us look into more than 130 of you have already voted. Let's see. Some of you would go for a wrong schedule, but the majority vote for drug administration interval too short and electrocardiogram QTc interval prolonged. But drug use for unapproved schedule as well, intentional deviation from dosage regimen. So we have split of opinions here, but the majority is going for either wrong schedule, drug dose administration interval too short, or electrocardiogram QTc interval prolonged. Let me close it, the poll. Thank you again for joining. And let us classify the type of deviation first, as we have done for the first example as well. So is it clear from the verbatim whether the incident occurred intentionally or accidentally? In my view, not. At first sight, it seems to be a medication error, but it could well be that the nurse made a conscious decision here to administer the antiarrhythmic drug earlier. Maybe the patient was scheduled for a surgery in the hospital in the afternoon, and it was brought forward to the morning, and she wanted to make sure that the patient receives his daily dose and decided to administer it earlier. We don't know. This is why I would classify as a product use issue and would look for a neutral term which captures the reported incident, like a product use issue term. So let me again switch to the browser, and Let us look for the proposed LLTs in the browser again. So first of all, we have to capture the specific type of deviation by the nurse from the prescribed, from the instructions of the physicians. We have wrong dose. Let us check wrong dose. Here's a direct hit. If I go to the browser again, we will see that it's grouped under medication errors and issues, use errors and issues NEC. Here we have the wrong dosage form, dosage formulation. So general terms that can be used in addition to other terms in order to capture the specifics of the deviation, of the occurrence, of the either error or misuse or off-label use. So it would be an option because the wrong dose was administered. What about wrong schedule? Would also be an option. Drug use for unapproved schedule was also an option. Here, the both do not capture the fact that it was finally administered, this drug. Yeah, it would only capture the specifics of the deviation of the administration issue. Drug use for unapproved schedule was one of the options as well. Here we are, drug use for unapproved schedule, go to browser. It's again grouped under this NEC term. It's considered a product use issue, but it doesn't capture the fact that the drug was actually administered to the patient again. What about drug dose administration interval too short? So enter this one. Here, drug dose administration interval too short, go to browser. And here we are at least in the correct HLT because it really captures the fact that the product was administered. It would be grouped under inappropriate schedule of product administration. This LLT is, so to say, a neutral term because it does not contain the information that the deviation from the prescribed schedule occurred in error. It could represent both an unspecified product administration issue and a product administration error. So I would go, as you saw in the classification, I would consider this an administration issue, not an error. But independent of my personal decision, if you would rather consider this an error, you could assign this LLT for both scenarios because it does not contain the information accidental. Same holds true for the PT. Intentional deviation from dosage regimen would not be appropriate because we don't know whether this deviation was intentional. This was not reported. In drug dose omission in error, again, the dose was not omitted. It was given too early. So drug dose omission in error would also not be appropriate. Well, what about the clinical consequences? Was there a chain of events? Yes, it was. There was harm in the patient because what was reported after this early dose administration was a QTC, that the QTC interval was prolonged. And we have, let us look for the QT interval, whether we have, what kind of LLTs we have there. So QT interval would be the test only, that would be used in order to code the test only, not the test result. We have a QTC reported that the QTC interval was prolonged. Here it is, electrocardiogram QTC interval prolonged. It was not prolonged as borderline, in a borderline sense, it was reported as prolonged. So this would be the appropriate term selection. The QT interval represents the time it takes for the ventricles to depolarize and repolarize, so contract and relax. And the QT interval is longer with a slower heart rate and shorter when the heart rate is faster. So it makes sense to take this into account. And this is done by calculating the corrected QT interval, the QTC interval, using the Bassett formula. The QTC value is more meaningful in a clinical sense and therefore more relevant for assessing the relevance for the patient. And it is worthwhile to make this distinction when coding as well. Now let's go back to our slide. And here again, the proposed assignments: drug dose administration interval too short, under inappropriate schedule of product administration, and electrocardiogram QTC interval prolonged under electrocardiogram QT prolonged. One participant at yesterday's session questioned the schedule problem, stating that this may have been the first administration of the drug. But I see a relationship between the early administration and the severe QTC prolongation. Several antiarrhythmic drugs, like for instance Sotalol, cause QT prolongations, and an early administration of such a drug would increase the drug level and aggravate this side effect. That is why I would classify this incident as a schedule issue and would not assume that it was the first dose that was given here. So did we receive other questions?
We've had comments around that. That point that you've just made, Caroline, that comes up from what was said yesterday.
Yes.
And we've got comments around that. You don't know what factor determined the timing of administration. Could be previous administration, but could also be administration of other product or other specifics of the patient's condition. And other comments suggesting premature, the term you mentioned, premature start of scheduled drug administration, as if it was the start of the treatment.
If it would have been the start of the drug, that would be fine. But I would rather interpret this as a schedule issue. I would see that as a continuous administration of an antiarrhythmic medication, where a nurse has administered one of the doses too early, and then the patient suffered a severe QTC prolongation on his ECG. But it may depend on the case description. I fully agree. So it's not fully correct. Sometimes maybe an interpretation. If you take this very serious, I would question or query this. Would go back to either the investigator or to the data manager in clinical in order to better understand the course of this medication. Here, administration, whether it was a continuous administration already, and the same holds true for drug safety, where you can ask your colleagues at in the data entry, data case processing roles, whether this antiarrhythmic medication was administered regularly to this patient, or whether this was the first administration where then the patient suffered a severe QTC prolongation first time. Yeah, for me, it rather looks like that this early administration led to an increased level of the drug in the blood of the patient, and therefore the QTC prolongation was aggravated, was more severe than previously.
Mm. So I think that's all. If anyone's got any further comments about that point, then let us know. I think they've all been addressed, the comments about that.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Caroline.
Then let's start with our next example. Here, a patient missed 2 doses of his medication as he wanted to go on vacation for the weekend and didn't want to carry the home infusion kit in his luggage. So he was aware that he was not following doctor's instructions. Now again, first we will have to look at the verbatim. Can we answer the first 3 questions? Yes, we can. And are we told at which stage the error occurred? And whether there was a chain of events, whether the use issue led to subsequent errors or to harm, to clinical consequences in the patient? And again, the last two bullet points here are not relevant for this verbatim. So this is again what we will have to consider in order to find the most suitable LLT or LLTs. So what would you do with this one here? Patient missed 2 doses as he wanted to go on vacation for the weekend and didn't want to carry the home infusion kit in his luggage. He was aware that he was not following doctor's instructions. Is it a drug dose omission in error, in intentional dose omission, intentional misuse in dosing frequency, intentional deviation from dosage regimen, temporary interruption of therapy, or is it a drug administration and interrupted? What is it? Which LLT would you select? So we have more than 100 votes already. Let's see what the trend is. Intentional dose omission is one. It's a favorite. Others would go for intentional misuse in dosing frequency, or intentional deviation from dosage regimen, or temporary interruption of therapy. Only few for drug administration interrupted. You see the granularity in Medra and how important it is to really understand what has been reported here and the meaning of these LLTs, what they represent. So let us close again the poll and first classify based on our decision chart. So what is reported here? It is an intentional deviation from the label or prescription by the patient, and it is not for therapeutic purposes. So we would usually classify it so it was just for his own convenience that the patient made this decision. So we would usually classify the incident as a drug abuse or dependence, but this doesn't fit in this instance. It's not a drug abuse that is reported here. Just an intentional deviation from the doctor's instructions. So here, I would rather classify this event as an intentional product use. So I would not select the abuse term, but I would classify as intentional product use issue. The decision chart provides general guidance on how to distinguish the different concepts, but will not apply for all different scenarios. So you will still have to apply medical judgment and consider the reported information, the verbatim, when taking your decision. So here we would not go for the abuse term, but for the intentional product use issue. Consider this an intentional product use issue. Let me show you in the browser again. And first let us search for the dose omission. Here we have this, and let's see what hits we get. So drug dose omission is a neutral term, product dose omission issue. Then we have drug dose omission in error, and we have the intentional drug dose omission, So here we know it was intentional, so intentional dose omission would definitely be a good choice for our verbatim. If I go for intentional dose, I will see other options. I will first see intentional misuse in dosing frequency. Here it is, intentional misuse in dosing frequency. If I go to the browser again and look into the hierarchy, it's grouped under intentional product misuses. So it's not a misuse that was reported here. It was not in the context of the therapeutic use of the drug. The patient made this decision for his own convenience. It was not a misuse. So it was an intentional product use issue. And here we find under intentional product use issue, we find intentional deviation from dosage regimen. So this would best represent our verbatim, either the intentional dose omission or the intentional deviation from dosage regimen. So this is really the question here. Let us first look at the other options that we have. Drug administration interrupted was one of the other options. Interrupted. Here it is. Go to browser again. It is here. Product administration interrupted. And if you look at the LLTs underneath, it also helps to understand what this PT is standing for. Infusion administration interrupted, single dose administration interrupted. So this rather refers to scenarios where a drug is provided as infusion or longer injection whatsoever, where a single dose is administered. And this administration is interrupted. It's not referring to a chain of administrations where some doses are missed. So the most suitable terms that we found is intentional dose omission and intentional deviation from dosage regimen. And the question is how now how to distinguish dose omissions and the interruption of drug therapy. You could decide to only use the dose omission terms when one single dose omission is reported or when such single dose omissions occur only sporadically. Non-singular occurrence of dose omissions could be considered a schedule issue. But again, what is a series of dose omissions? Would missing 2 consecutive doses already constitute a series? So in order to handle such scenarios consistently, it would really be useful to provide more detailed guidance in your in-house coding conventions here. In my personal view, 2 consecutive dose omissions would still qualify for the code assignment dose omission. But this is my personal view. You may really come up with more strict conventions as well. So if we look again at the concept description of dose omission, here it is. Dose omission, the failure to administer an ordered dose to a patient before the next scheduled dose, if any. So this excludes patients who refuse to take a medication, a clinical decision, or other reasons not to administer. So this doesn't help much to take our decision whether we select the intentional dose omission term or rather consider this a schedule issue. If I go for the inappropriate schedule, let's see if there is a concept description for inappropriate schedule as well. Here it is, includes all deviations from the prescribed dosage schedule. So this is really quite vague. Again, not really helpful for our scenario. The other possibility we had was temporary interruption of therapy. Just to be complete here. Here it is to show you the hierarchy of this term. Here it is. Go to browser. Again, you can see it's grouped in a completely different system organ class. It's considered a therapeutic measure. It's grouped in the surgical and medical procedure SOC. Here we have it. So therapy interrupted would be the PT. So again, it's always important before assigning an LLT to check the hierarchy. Temporary interruption of therapy looks at first sight appropriate, but based on the hierarchy of this term, it's not suitable for the reported scenario. The PTC companion document explains when to use LLT therapy interrupted or LLT temporary interruption of therapy in the chapter about dose omission classification. So first it is explained what is meant by dose omission, the failure to administer an ordered dose to a patient before the next scheduled dose, if any. We saw that already in the concept descriptions. And that the cause or contributing factors for those dose omissions are necessary to determine if the omission is in order to classify whether the omission is a medication error or not, and to be able to select the appropriate Medra terms. We are first taught that in general, dose omissions represent medication errors. For example, when a patient misunderstands instructions or forgets a dose. The second bullet point here refers to scenarios where dose omissions cannot be considered medication errors. These scenarios relate to a conscious decision of the patient, like in our example, or other scenarios where patients skip a dose of an antidiabetic because of low blood sugar, or where patients hold the medicine one day prior to surgery. So these are the intentional deviations. But those omissions may also be unspecified, where the cause or contributing factor is unknown. And we saw that there are terms in Medra that would reflect such vaguely reported dose omissions. And the last bullet point here explains about PT therapy interrupted. And this PT does not refer to any of the previous scenarios. This PT should only be used to code incidents that were caused by non-clinical or external factors such as supply, insurance, financial issues, meaning that such scenarios are not under the control either of the healthcare professional, patient, or consumer. So this is really important to remember how to classify dose omissions and how to when to use LLTs under PT therapy interruption. With this, I would propose to code this incident to intentional dose omission. It's the same PT. But depending on your internal coding conventions, you could also consider this scenario as an intentional deviation from the schedule and assign LLT intentional deviation from dosage regimen, because more than one dose is omitted in a series. In my view, I would prefer LLT intentional dose omission, even though more than one dose was omitted, because the patient doesn't deviate from the schedule on a regular basis, but only at one occasion when traveling over the weekend. Did we get related questions here for this example, Jane?
Yes, again, mirroring what we received yesterday. What about treatment non-compliance for the fact that the patient was not following doctor's instructions? Would you also select this?
Not really. It's hard to find definitions for non-compliance in order to clearly distinguish this term from other terms that we have just discussed. So non-compliance is always caused by the patient or consumer. That's clear. Non-compliance is never referring to a healthcare professional. But non-compliance can result from a variety of factors. And they can really refer to a medication error, either a medication error or to an intentional act. And also, non-compliance rather refers to an habitual non-adherence. So it occurs repeatedly. So repeated deviation, non-adherence with a therapeutic or health-promoting plan, and not to single isolated events. Here we have a single isolated event, and in my view, that therefore non-compliance would not be appropriate. Any further questions?
And then there's a question that I think maybe relates to the decision tree, maybe a bit of confusion there. Could you please repeat the reason why the use of the product was not for therapeutic use? I didn't remember you saying that, so I don't know whether it might be the decision tree. Do you want to go through that again, or?
Yeah, I can go back here. Here we are. So we said it's intentional, it was triggered by the patient. We have to decide whether it was for a therapeutic intention or in the therapeutic context. But here, the patient did not intentionally decide to skip a dose because I don't know, because he had to undergo surgery the next day or something like that. It was just for his own convenience. It was not for therapeutic reasons, and that's why we cannot assume a therapeutic intention. He should have administered his medication for therapeutic reasons, but he decided not to do so for his own convenience, not because there were any therapeutic thoughts behind it. That's why I would not consider this a misuse, and also not an abuse dependence, because usually you would classify such events as abuse or dependence, but abuse would rather relate to situations where we take a drug, too much of a drug, or by a different route or something like that for non-therapeutic purposes. But here we are talking about a dose omission, so the abuse dependence doesn't fit. And I would rather consider this an intentional product use issue. Although we know that it was not for a therapeutic intention, I would go for intentional product use issue in this instance. I hope this made it more clear.
And the follow-on is, what code would you choose if it had been for therapeutic intention?
For therapeutic intention, let's go back to our... Then you would, if it would have been for therapeutic intention, then you would go for intentional misuse, either in dosing frequency or also intentional dose omission. So whatever you choose, whether you consider this as a frequency issue or a dose omission, depending on your coding conventions.
Okay, thank you, Caroline.
Mm-hmm.
And
so
thank you.
Let me go back to my slides now. I have to click through.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. No, it's okay. Next one. Next, it is reported that a patient missed doses as the delivery got lost and reordering took several days. So again, let's look at the verbatim first. This example is more tricky. Do we know whether this was accidental or intentional? Well, rather not intentional. And did the patient or HCP cause the incident? No, it was caused by external factors. And did the deviation from the regular administration schedule happen in the context of therapeutic use for therapeutic purposes? Again, rather not. And can we say at which stage in the medication use process the incident occurred? No, because the incident happened outside of the actual medication use process. It was out of the control of the healthcare professionals and the patient. We may have to split code, yes, because we know that the patient missed doses of the medication and that the root cause was the fact that he couldn't get his medication because the delivery got lost. So this needs to be captured or considered here when looking at the verbatim and when selecting potentially suitable LLTs in order to code this scenario. So what would you do with this one? Patient missed doses as the delivery got lost and reordering took several days. Drug dose omission in error, intentional dose omission, product availability issue, drug administration interrupted, or temporary interruption of therapy. Remember what we have just discussed about the different types excuse me, of dose omissions and how they should be classified based on the PTC companion document. Now most of you would go for product availability issue and temporary interruption, others also for drug dose omission or drug administration interrupted. Let me close the poll in the interest of time. And again, show you in the browser. Here we are. So drug administration interrupted seems to be suitable for this verbatim, but we talked about this PT before. This term describes a different scenario, namely the interruption of one drug administration. For instance, an interruption of an intravenous injection or infusion. But in our case, the patient missed taking his medication for several days. So drug dose omission in error was one option, but it was not an error, so was not suitable. Intentional dose omission would not be suitable because it was not an intentional decision, a conscious decision by the patient. He wanted to take the medication, but he didn't get it. And drug dose omission would be a neutral term, but here it would not be suitable because a series of doses was missed, not just one or two. Meaning that the reported scenario does not describe an intentional deviation or medication error by the patient or a product use issue, because the incident did not occur in the medication use process and it was not under the control of those involved in the product use process. So let's have a look at the remaining two coding options then. It was product availability issue. Let's see here, product availability issue. If I click on it again, right mouse click, go to browser, you see we are on product issues, SOC, here we are, and it's grouped under HLT product supply and availability issues. Here it is. So the product was not available, it was an availability issue. This needs to be captured as the root cause for the fact that the patient couldn't take his drug. And because this was not under the control of anybody involved in the usual medication use process, this cannot be coded to any of the terms that are grouped in the injury SOC. So here, the temporary interruption of therapy would be the correct code assignment. Remember what we saw earlier in the companion document. So this would now be the appropriate term selection, temporary interruption of therapy, grouped under the HLT, many here, therapeutic procedures, NEC, in SOC surgical and medical procedures.
So, Caroline, we've got a comment there on this one. The meaning of delivery. Can we be sure that delivery is outside the product usage process? Maybe this could the delivery be part of it? So could the delivery be from the pharmacy to the patient, or are we being too picky in our verbatim there?
I think it's too picky. I don't know. It's somehow it's an external factors. Yeah. Even though it's within the hospital. We don't know. It could be that the delivery from the wholesaler got lost to the pharmacy. So this is nothing that is really under the control of the healthcare professional or the patient or consumer.
Yeah, that's how we read it.
If the delivery gets lost in the hospital because for any reason, it's not under the control of the pharmacist.
That's true. We read it as a delivery outside of the usage process, didn't we? We saw it as more of an availability. Then we've got another question around that. Product supply issue might be a better fit rather than availability because the drug was available to order. The root cause was the problem in the supply chain and not the availability of the drug to order or to purchase.
Could be, yeah. I think this is really difficult to decide, especially the terms in the in this system organ class. Product issues are sometimes difficult to distinguish. Just to let you know that the PTC companion document will be amended with additional instructions, additional guidance in order to better understand all these terms. I have to admit, for me, it was availability was the I selected this one, but I agree, supply issue would maybe also an option. Let me check the concept description, whether there is any product supply, label, packaging, storage. No, it's not there. Maybe it's under S, supply. No guidance in the concept descriptions. And if I've opened the companion document already, here it is, the companion document. And if I go for, look for supply, maybe we find some product supply and availability. The patient was told by a pharmacist that her medication was not available due to a shortage in drugs in supply following closure of several manufacturing facilities. So this would be a supply issue. So it's rather, and here the pharmacist informed the patient that his medication was not available due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Yeah, but here it's truly said that it's availability issue, and here also available shortage in supply. So this is the kind of example that really do not reflect real life scenarios. I don't find it helpful here, and it's not further explained. So we can find, I think both would be fine. Supply rather seems to be referring to the manufacturer. So manufacturing, where the supply by the manufacturer is not guaranteed or not ensured. Whether availability may be closer to the hospital. So maybe availability is better in this instance, but this is my personal interpretation.
Thank you, Caroline.
So I hope that with the next version of the PTC companion document that we will get more guidance, because some of the terms in the SOC product issues are really very granular, and you need to have pharmaceutical knowledge in order to clearly distinguish the different concepts. And well, related to the therapy interruption, we saw the guidance of the companion document where it says that the terms under PT therapy interrupted do not refer to any scenario that relates to medication errors or other product use issues, but that they represent incidents which are due to non-clinical or external factors, which are not under the control of the healthcare professional, patient, or consumer. So in our example, the external factor was the product availability issue. So here we have the correct code assignments, temporary interruption of therapy under PT therapy interrupted, and product availability issue under PT product availability issues. Any further questions, Jane? Do we have further questions?
Sorry, I was on mute. What product shipment delay is another suggestion. That again is from the factory, is it?
It would rather be from the factory, from the wholesaler. Yeah, factory wholesaler.
Product shipment is different. Ours doesn't say that.
Yeah, could have been lost in the hospital change. So pharmacy, central pharmacy may have sent the drug to the ordering HCP, but somehow the delivery got lost in the hospital. Could also be a scenario.
Thank you. Okay.
Next one. In the next case, it is reported that the medication was infused in 1 hour instead of 3, as prescribed, due to a malfunction of the infusion pump. Again, we have to check the usual criteria to understand what has been reported here. So here, there was a malfunction of the infusion pump, and this led to the fact that the infusion was administered in 1 hour instead of 3 hours, as prescribed. So this is what we can answer the question whether the incident occurred intentionally or accidentally. We know the cause for the deviation, from the prescription, and we also know whether the incident occurred in the context of the therapeutic use of the product and at which stage in the medication use process. So what would you do with this verbatim now? Infused in 1 hour instead of 3 as prescribed due to malfunction of the infusion pump. Do we have to split code here? What needs to be captured? And how can we best capture it? Drug administration error and wrong rate, drug administration rate too fast, accidental overdose, pump infusion issue, pump over infusion, or device over infusion. What would you select? Again, we have more than 100 votes already. Let us check. So most of you are going for drug administration rate too fast and pump infusion issue. Remember, always code as specifically as possible. Also the device malfunction. Now let us check. Thank you for joining. Let me close the poll. And first, again, classify the event with our chart here. So was this intentional or accidental? It was, of course, accidental. The incorrect infusion rate was due to a malfunction of the infusion pump. We cannot say who caused it. So the doctor or the nurse has installed the pump but did nothing wrong. This is not reported. There was an unexpected malfunction of the pump, meaning that the incident occurred accidentally, and it also occurred in the context of therapeutic use of the product. So it represents a medication error, but a somehow different scenario as compared to our previous examples. Let us again check how we can approach this verbatim, how we can select what are the LLTs that we could select. Again, the wrong rate is just capturing one specific part of the information. Here we have the wrong rate. Again, I showed this earlier. It's in the injury SOC under the non-elsewhere classified HLT, under the medication errors and other product use errors and issues. Here it is, and here we have the wrong rate. We would have to combine it with drug administration error. Then we would capture both the fact that it was an error, an administration error, and the specifics of the error. Then we have drug administration rate too fast. And if I look for this one, here it is. I would capture the fact that the drug was actually administered. So here it is, drug administration rate too fast under incorrect drug administration rate. So we would capture the stage of the medication error in this instance. Now, what about accidental overdose? Would it be an accidental overdose? The dose is the same. So the dose and volume that was administered to the patient was the same, but the infusion was too fast. So it was not an overdose, not an accidental overdose. And the pump infusion, let me check for pump and infusion, always trying to use word stem. Here it is, pump not infusing, that was not the case. Pump infusion issue was one option that we saw. Same PT, so this is a more general, vague term, but what we know is that the malfunction of the pump led to an overinfusion, so faster than expected, was more than expected or intended per time unit. So it was an overinfusion. The most specific term that we can select here is device overinfusion, mean or better pump overinfusion, that would even capture the fact that a pump was not functioning as expected. Let me go back to my slides. And here you may now argue that drug administration rate too fast does not contain the information that this happened accidentally. The companion document also provides clarity here. So it says that we should avoid double coding the same error, meaning that we should not use multiple LLTs to capture a singular error that is reported with both a general and a specific verbatim. We should only code the specific error. And the example given is the following. It is reported that there was an administration error in that the wrong drug was administered. And we should only select LLT wrong drug administered in this instance for this specific error. We should not use an additional LLT drug administration error for the general description because this would not add any meaningful information, even though the two LLTs are linked to different PTs. And in the section for administration errors and issues, we find a corresponding example, an additional example. If a patient accidentally took one tablet twice daily instead of the prescribed one tablet once daily, we should only code to LLT once daily dose taken more frequently. And the argument is that it is more important to select a specific LLT for the reported scenario. Although the LLT does not capture that it was accidental, it falls under the HLT product administration errors and issues, and this is obviously considered sufficient. So this is similar to the scenario in our example, and therefore we would not split into drug administration error and wrong rate, but only select one LLT, namely drug administration rate too fast. So here we are. This is the root cause, the cause for the administration error. It was the pump over infusion under device infusion issue, and we would select drug administration rate too fast under incorrect drug administration rate. The companion document clearly states that situations such as product quality or product supply issues are outside of one's control and therefore usually not classified as medication errors, but they can result in medication errors. And the example provided in the document are product quality issues like a device malfunction or packaging defect that result in an incorrect dose administered. So a comparable scenario to our example here. Any questions, Jane?
Yes, we have got some comments, Caroline, on this one. Would the LLT device component malfunction capture the malfunction components?
We don't know which kind of malfunction there was. I would not go for component, but keep it rather vague. And we know it was a pump that was not functioning. So I would really look for the pump malfunction and see what kind of LLTs I find for the specifics of this pump malfunction, infusion pump malfunction.
And then we've got comments about that. What about drug delivery device malfunction? That one. So pump is more specific, isn't it?
Pump is more specific. Always be as specific as possible. And we know a specific device. We have specific device information here, and we would try to capture it.
And there's a comment that maybe pump over infusion may be human error, but we don't see it like that. We didn't see that.
No, and it's not classified as this in Medra itself. So always check the hierarchy. It's considered a device malfunction, and we would try to capture this device malfunction as specifically as possible. Both the malfunction, what type of malfunction it was, and the specific device.
And then there's two comments around, couldn't over-infusions indicate that too much of the product had been infused? And then is this an overdose potentially?
I don't think so. Over-infusion would rather mean that, it could mean both. But as I said, if it would really indicate that usually if you have an infusion, you have a certain amount of volume with a specified dose in there, and then you just program your infusion pump and say, well, this should be administered in 3 hours, like in our example, and then it is infused. If it's too fast, the dose is still the same. So I think over infusion does not mean that the dose is incorrect, because you would always have a certain defined amount of your medication and the volume, the defined volume in your container.
Mm. That's all for now, Carol-Ann.
Okay, then the last one, shortly, taking 20 laxative tablets a day to lose weight. Again, here we have to ask ourselves the usual question. We know it was intentional in this case. It was a patient or consumer, and it was not in the context of therapeutic use. It was taken for a different indication than obstipation. And also too many tablets were taken per day. We know the stage where the incident occurred and have to ask ourselves whether split coding will be necessary here. And there's no information again about the last 2 bullet points. So here we are. This needs to be considered for term selection. Now, how would you, which LLTs would you assign for this one? Intentional drug misuse, drug abuse, drug dependence, intentional deviation from dosage regimen, overdose, intentional overdose, and weight loss are the options, coding options. Let's see what the trends are. Most of you are going for intentional drug misuse, others for drug abuse, and intentional overdose are favorite options here. Let me close the poll and first classify the event. So here we know it was an intentional deviation from the label by the patient, and it was not for a therapeutic purpose as indicated in the label. It was for different purposes, for weight loss. So this is a drug abuse, not a dependence. This was not reported, but needs to be classified as drug abuse. Again, let me switch again. So it's not a drug misuse. I mentioned this already because it was not in the context of therapeutic use. It was not for therapeutic purposes as indicated, as defined in the label. It was for a desired effect, but not related to the labeled therapeutic indication. Drug abuse, yes, this is the reported scenario. It represents a drug abuse, and drug dependence, we were not told that it was drug dependence. So drug abuse would be the correct assignment. When we have classified the incident, we will have to capture the specifics in addition. So let us check. It was an intentional deviation, intentional and indication. It was the wrong indication. This was one option. Intentional use for unlabeled indication. So that's clear. The laxative is taken to lose weight for an unlabeled indication. Then we have intentional deviation from dosage regimen was one other option that we had. This would also apply because the dose that was administered or taken by the patient was much more than indicated in the label. So it was an intentional deviation from the dosage regimen. And the question is whether this can be considered overdose. Would be too vague. We know it was an intentional deviation. So if at all, we would select intentional overdose. So this would be the other option. Well, it is a deviation from the dosage regimen, but it could also be considered an intentional overdose. My preference would be to classify as intentional overdose, and because it was an intentional deviation, because it was an intentional deviation. Because in my view, it is hard to believe that the patient takes 1 tablet each hour, 20 tablets per day, we were told. 1 tablet each hour would mean even at nighttime. So he or she will rather take 5 or 10 tablets 4 or 2 times a day. And this would then represent an overdose, an excessive dose each time. But you may also be more conservative and rather select intentional deviation from dosage regimen and not assume an intentional overdose. And we would, of course, also have to capture the indication for use, the weight loss, with the corresponding LLT weight loss. So there's one direct hit. If you enter weight loss here, you find the weight loss. Here it is, same, here it is on the PT weight decreased. Let me switch back so that we can, so here the final proposals. We would go to laxative abuse, so very specific term that can be selected here for the specific drug that is abused under PT drug abuse. We would select intentional use for unlabeled indication because it was taken for weight loss, not for obstipation. Grouped under intentional product use issue, or we could also select intentional deviation from dosage regimen, same PT. So in order to capture one of the specifics, you could code either of those. Yeah, both are grouped under the same PT. But you could, of course, also decide to code to intentional overdose instead. You could use the intentional use for unlabeled indication plus intentional overdose in order to capture the deviation from the usual dose. But if you are conservative, you would, if you prefer a more conservative approach, you would rather select intentional deviation from dosage regimen and not assume an overdose. Maybe the case information would clarify that the 20 tablets were taken in a few doses only, then it would definitely be an intentional overdose. And you would capture the weight loss. Do we have questions or comments here, Jane?
Only that it might, with laxative abuse, it might not be an intentional overdose. It might be more of a tolerance and needing to take more to get the same effect.
But would you then take 20? I don't know. I think it's an abuse because it's taken to lose weight, obviously rapidly, and then 20 tablets are taken a day per day. I would consider this an abuse, not a tolerance.
Yeah.
Of our examples, I will shift them to the next session. So this is a summary of what we have covered today, some links to useful information, also the email address of the MSSO help desk, just in case you want to propose some verbatims that you would like to see in one of the subsequent workshops that we offer, the link to the training schedule page, and this is what you can find here. This is the session that we have today, the workshop, and you see that the new sessions are scheduled for the 9th of February and the 16th of February. And you can also see that the Medra, the first part, will also be provided in Chinese and in the US Eastern Standard Time time zone in February. And this is the next one that will be provided in Central European time zone. Here, some information. What is useful in terms of contact, how to contact the MSSO. What is really useful is our YouTube channel, and I would like to shortly show you how to use this YouTube channel. Oops, let me switch back. Why can't I switch back to my slide now? Let me again close. Here I am. Here's our Medra website. If I click on contact, here we have our YouTube channel, the icon. If you click on the icon, you will be brought directly to our YouTube channel, and you see all the recorded webinars sorted by trainers. And you will find the recorded sessions, both the part 1 and also the workshop, you will find under my name if you click on complete playlist here. So you can find them there. So if some of your colleagues were not able to join today, you can provide them with this information or if you cannot join one of the future sessions, future workshops, you can always watch them here. You can listen back to them here on this website, or of any other colleagues providing training for the MSSO. Okay, here we are. So do we have last minute questions, Jane?
No, there's just a bit of follow-up on that last example, Caroline, about the fact the indication wasn't the intended indication. So do you still count that as a deviation from dosage regime? And would you still code the indication if it wasn't the intended indication, as it's an abuse?
Yeah, it's really dependent on the data entry convention. So if the laxative is a suspect drug, for instance, if this is your product, you would capture, depending on your data entry conventions, you would code the abuse, but you may also want to capture the unlabeled indication then as well, in addition, depending on that. Yeah.
That's
so
the question.
So here we are now reaching the end of the session. I mentioned before that you can provide us with proposals for future sessions, verbatims. So if you want to do so now, you can scan this QR code again. It will bring you directly to the survey. It's very short, it will only take a few minutes of your time, but it's really important to get your feedback in order to improve content, to see whether we really met your needs and with our training. So hopefully you will have you will be able to invest some minutes of your time in order to provide us with some feedback. And thank you for your input already in advance. And with this, I would like to say thank you to you for joining today. I hope that you found the new workshop here helpful for your work, and hope to meet you again in one of our coming medication webinar workshops or other webinars that we offer, and sometimes hopefully in the future also again in face-to-face training events. So with this, thank you again for joining today, and also thank you to you, Jane, for supporting me today, and enjoy the rest of your day. Happy holidays, have a good start into the new year, stay safe and healthy, and goodbye for now. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone. Bye-bye.